Hey everybody, welcome back to Hot Cakes and Hot Reads. Excuse me while I take some bread out of the oven that I forgot was there. Today we are going to make some pancakes together and talk about books. I'm making sourdough pumpernickel, so let's see how that turns out, everybody. Um, Today I want to thank John Lewis, who is a William Jeans Library patron, again for the idea. I'm going to thank you every single time, John. Yay, thank you. Um, Uh, First, some library news. This last week, we started curbside pickup of holds at the library, so we're going to be continuing this next week. If you have any holds placed in the catalog, they will soon be filled, and we will be in touch. We're going to call you and get you into some scheduled slots from Wednesday through Saturday to come by the library and pick up curbside. And eventually we'll be opening back up to the library. We're still in the process of making plans for that, although we just heard that Montgomery County will be moving to the green phase on the 26th. Yay! So check out our website, jeanslibrary.org, for more information about that. Also, today is the kickoff of our summer reading programs for all age groups at the library. We are doing babies through kindergarten, school-age kids, teens, and adults this year. All of them are going to be done in an online program, so you can find more information, again, at our website, jeanslibrary.org, or you can visit jeanslibrary.beanstack, that's bean with an N, beanstack.org, to find out more information about the summer reading program and get registered there. So that's all the library news. For today, we are going to be making some pancakes and talking about books, sort of in celebration of yesterday's Juneteenth anniversary. Juneteenth, June 19th, is the celebration, the holiday to mark the day that the last of the American slaves in Galveston, Texas, heard the federal proclamation that they were freed, June 19th, 1865. It took that long for the proclamation to reach across the United States. So today's recipe is actually a recipe found in Rosa Parks's personal archive of materials. Sort of discovered in 2017 because even though she passed in the 2000s, come here, baby. My dog is here, everybody. Hi. Even though she passed much earlier than that, her estate was tied up in a legal battle, and so all of her personal effects, which were supposed to get divvied up into various places, were in a warehouse. But in 2017, I believe that legal battle was settled. You can read more about it if you Google it. And in her personal effects, on the back of a banking envelope, was this pancake recipe, which she called a feather-light pancake recipe. So, the ingredients. We have 1 cup of flour. We have 2 tablespoons of baking powder. Right here. It's a fair amount of baking powder. A half teaspoon of salt. We have 2 tablespoons of sugar, which is also a fair amount of sugar for a pancake recipe. And 1 egg, right here. A 1/3 cup of smooth peanut butter, which is not something you see in a pancake recipe very often. And then 1 tablespoon of oil, which I have to get out here, and 1 1/4 cup milk, so whole milk here. All right, so those are our ingredients. I'm going to be sifting and blending and mixing them throughout, but I do want to talk about our first book today. So this week, for the library, we hosted a library program where we had a Netflix party, which is just a browser extension in Chrome that allows people to watch Netflix streams at the exact same time. And we watched the documentary 13th by Ava DuVernay, and it had been on my personal to-watch list for quite a while. We had actually showed it at the library a couple of years ago, and because it's the library program, I didn't get to sit in on it, and it had been in my list, and I knew I needed to watch it. And it was both amazing to watch and just devastating. I told my friends that I sobbed for the last 10 minutes. 13th is a documentary about the 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, which sort of declared slavery illegal, except there's a little clause in that declaration that says, except in the case of criminality. I don't have the actual text, sorry, look it up. So the documentary's argument is that slavery was abolished, except just moved to the criminal justice system. The argument for this is long and varied, and she does a really wonderful job of exploring the history all the way up through our present moment. One of the people that she interviewed in the documentary is the author of this book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness, Michelle Alexander. So this book is available from the library either as a hard copy, if you go to our catalog, or if you want to check out an ebook or an audiobook version of it, you can go to our Overdrive collection, either montcolibes.overdrive.com, or download the app Libby from our app store and search in that. It's a pretty easy process to get signed up. All right, so this book I had actually read before, but I hadn't read in a few years. Again, I was reminded of the book when I watched that documentary. This book is an argument that our criminal justice system is not a neutral system that has a racial bias problem. It's actually a system built from the ground up with the purpose of control, social control of especially racial minorities. The book is peppered with sobering facts. The United States has 5% of the world's population, but of the population of imprisoned peoples across the world, we have 25% of that population. People of color represent 60% of people in cages in our country, but only 39% of the overall US population. The book is well-researched, well-written. She comes from a standpoint of transformation, where she believed in the fact that the criminal justice system was a neutral system, and then as she does research for the book, transitions to the point where she is arguing that we have a system of control in place in the United States. The bitterest fact, I think, in the book is that she makes the argument that Obama's election allowed our society to believe that we were in a post-racial society and look past or turn a blind eye to a lot of the problems that people of color were still facing in our country, especially our Black American compatriots. Okay, so that's New Jim Crow, and I would recommend that one highly. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to sift these dry ingredients together. I'm going to get my sifter, and I'm going to start by sifting the flour through my sifter. And tap, 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 tap. And then get all the dry ingredients together before we mix the wet ingredients into a different bowl. All right, so while I'm sifting this here, I'm going to talk about our next book. Some people process information best with a nonfiction title. You know, presented with information and a clear argument, they can understand where someone is coming from. And it's certainly, you know, that I can get behind that. But I am one of those people that often gets that information and understands it abstractly until I experience something from a specific person's point of view, or in the case of fiction, a fictionalized person's point of view, which is one of the things that I love about art, especially fiction, movies, that I can get that opportunity to experience another person's life. And so I'm going to talk about The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison is left the world last year. But she is one of the most decorated Black authors of the last, I don't know, decades, but maybe century. All right, so we got my flour sifted. I'm going to put the sugar, the baking powder, and the salt together, and then whisk them a little bit to get them mixed up. So she is just a renowned author. This is her first novel, so published in the early 70s, and it centers on a young Black woman who lives in Lorain, Ohio. She has very dark skin. She has very typically African features, and so as a result, she is often told by everyone that she is ugly. And so she internalizes this. The book is about this internalization, this desire of this girl to be whiter than she is, to have bluer eyes. I think I put this book, I actually haven't read it. So I've put this book at the top of my to-read list. I've read a few other Toni Morrison novels, but I've never read this one. And so I think in some ways this is an important book to understand that process, that othering of African American people in our communities. But also Toni Morrison is a heck of a writer. Her sentences are, intricate, but also straightforward. She just has a way with words that those best authors do. And so I can't wait to finish this one. It's also it's one of her shortest books, you can see. So I feel like I can fit it in at this point as we work to reopen the library and still, find a way to have fiction in my life. So that is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. All right, so I got my dry ingredients sifted. I'm going to mix my wet ingredients in the bigger bowl here. So milk, 1.25 cups of milk, the egg. Get out my oil behind me here for a tablespoon of oil. And we're just going to eyeball that one, everybody. All right. And then I am going to combine them as I talk about our next book. All right, so our next book is back to the nonfiction. This one is called Locking Up Our Own, Crime and Punishment in Black America, by James Forman Jr., who is a public defender and also a professor of law at the Yale Law School. The book is an exploration of the policies that resulted, some of which resulted in our current system of incarceration. In the 70s and the 80s, America saw a spike in crime. There are lots of arguments for why that is, and this book goes into some of it. But the main interrogation of the book is that it is an exploration of why Black leaders, especially, got behind these policies that were built to restrict their communities. The policies, the tough on crime policies, the 3 strikes you're out, mandatory minimum sentencing. All of these policies that work together in the end to decimate, in some cases, our Black American communities, were enforced, were reinforced, were supported by many Black leaders. Marion Barry in D.C., the federal prosecutor Eric Holder. The book details a lot of these public figures who, in fact, supported these policies that eventually went on to really inflict a lot of harm on the Black American communities. And so Forman was interested in why that was, and went to explore. It's a very sympathetic look. A lot of people who did support these policies were very specifically worried about backlash against the advances made from the civil rights era as crime erupted in our cities. And so he deals with it with a measured hand. I do recommend reading it as a nice understanding of the systems that were built and led us to our current incarceration, our carceral state. Anyway, all right. So that is Locking Up Our Own: Crime and Punishment in Black America by James Foreman Jr. That one is available in our library catalog as a hard copy only. But I forgot to say that Bluest Eye is available as a hard copy and an audiobook in our catalog, but also as an ebook and an audiobook in our Overdrive collection. So you can search Libby for Bluest Eye and you will find it there. All right, so I'm going to put our wet ingredients together. I already put the wet ingredients together. I'm going to whisk them is what I'm going to do now. So I've got my egg and my oil and my milk, and I am whisking them together. I'm going to scoop out my peanut butter and give us a fluffy little pancake. All right. I have not actually made these pancakes before, everybody. So one of the things you want to make sure you do when you are serving pancakes that have peanut butter in them, obviously, is make sure everybody knows there is peanut butter in them ahead of time. We have a lot of people in our lives these days who have nut allergies, peanut allergies, and so you don't often expect peanut butter to be incorporated into a pancake batter. And so you got to make sure you tell people ahead of time. But this is going to give it a nice peanutty taste, and it contributes a bit to the fluffiness of the pancake. All right, so we got that mixed up, nice and whisked, and now we're going to put the dry ingredients in slowly as I fold it over. All right. So you can leave in the comments, as I get this stuff folded together, any other books you've been reading lately that you've really enjoyed. I have been reading pretty extensively just to try to understand, excuse me, our current situation in America. There are reading lists published very widely about how to be an anti-racist, and I think that is a really important project for all of us. And so I would recommend anybody to seek out those new books that have been published, or those reading lists that go back and detail a lot of work that people have done in the past to help us understand the systems that have been built in our country that we need to understand to get why these protests are happening, to maybe approach from a compassionate point of view. All right, so I've got my wet ingredients mixed together with my dry ingredients. And what I need to do now is turn on my griddle to 350 and get a little butter on there and talk about the last book that I have in store for you, which is, this is Washington Black by Essie Adugin. We read this book for the William Jeans Library Book Club at some point in the last year. I can't remember exactly when, but and I fell in love with this book. This book, the style of the book is beautiful. It's written with a real sense of flair, and Essie Adugin is a woman and writes from the point of view of an 11-year-old boy all the way up through his young adult life beautifully. So that boy is Washington Black. The book is centered on the experiences of this boy who is he begins the story on a slave plantation in Barbados. Separate from the American slave experience, but still tied up in the same systems of oppression. Barbados was the last place that was technically a part of the British Empire that allowed slaves. And so the plantation goes through this process of slave freedom, but Washington Black is not there to see it. So the story starts as the master of the plantation's brother arrives. The master of the plantation is a terrible person. He treats his slaves awfully, and they are all in terror of him. The brother arrives, and all the slaves are worried about what this means, but the brother ends up being a fairly sympathetic person Wash, or what, Washington Black, his nickname is Wash, is assigned to the brother as his personal assistant slave, and the brother sort of gives Wash a purpose. He gives him, he folds him into the experiments that the brother is there to perform. He's trying to create a flying machine, and he brings Wash in, encourages his scientific mind, and so they reach a really mutual, beneficial relationship, except eventually Wash is accused of the murder of a white man on the plantation who actually has committed suicide. And the brother and Wash flee the Barbados plantation. This is all in the first quarter of the story. The story then goes on a global trip. And so we wind up in Virginia, in the Underground Railroad, eventually to the Arctic. I'm sorry, reaching for my butter, everybody. We go up to the Arctic Circle, where some really isolated and terrible experiences happen to both of them. The story ends up in London, and all along, Wash is dealing with the legacy of slavery. He is constantly questioning why his scientific input is less valuable than those of white men, why his building of a marine exhibit in London should not have his name on it, despite the fact that he's the one who did all the exploration for the exhibits. And so it's much more complicated than that, and it does a wonderful job of exploring why white people in this case, in this time, refused to, even in the case of a beloved friend, as the brother calls Wash, even in the case of a beloved friend, why black people are still seen as lesser. And that is Washington Black by Essie Adugin. You can get that one in hard copy from the library. It is not available in Libby. But if you do have suggestions for ebooks and audiobooks in our Overdrive collection, which is what Libby reads from, you can search for books in Libby, and if we don't own them, there is a suggest button at the bottom. Our district librarian receives all those suggestions, and we evaluate if it meets our collection criteria, and then we add them to the collection if it does. All right, everybody, those are all the books that I have to suggest today. I'm going to flip these pancakes a little bit and see if anybody hops on and wants to talk about books they've been reading. Like I said, it's one of those big moments in our culture where everyone seems to have agreed that we have reached a tipping point. And so, like I said, those reading lists that have been published widely, anti-racist reading lists, you can find them anywhere. You can always contact us at the library to see if we have the books that you're looking for. If we don't have them at William Jeans, I encourage you to place a hold in our catalog, and we can eventually get them to you after books start moving between libraries. Oh, these are really light pancakes, everybody. I'm really excited to try these. When I flip them, they look like feathers, just like the title. And they smell heavenly. The peanut butter smell is coming off of them. I never would have believed that the addition of peanut butter to pancake batter would make it lighter, but wow, these are really fluffy and bubbly. That's beautiful. All right. Thank you, everybody, for stopping by and sharing a Saturday morning with me, as always. I will post the recipe and the book titles in the comments on the event link on the William Jeans Facebook page and on our homepage, jeanslibrary.org. You can find our events at jeanslibrary.org/events. And you'll see the Hotcakes and Hot Reads event for today, June 20th. And then click on that link and you'll find the recipe and the book list. with links to our catalog and to Libby, so that you can either put a hold on them if they're already checked out, or you can check them out yourselves. All right, thanks everybody. I will see you again in 2 weeks.